What happens when Hollywood's most charming leading man loses his cool on live television? Tonight, we witness something absolutely unprecedented as George Clooney, known for his unflappable composure and legendary wit, reached his breaking point during what started as a routine late-night appearance. By the end of this interview, one of the biggest stars in the world would storm off the set, leaving Jimmy Kimmel and millions of viewers in complete shock. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what you think really pushed Clooney over the edge. The evening began like any other Jimmy Kimmel live taping. The audience was buzzing with excitement as Jimmy took the stage with his usual energy, ready to welcome one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. George Clooney walked out to thunderous applause, that familiar smile lighting up his face as he waved to the crowd. Everything seemed perfectly normal as he settled into the guest chair, the two men exchanging pleasantries about mutual friends and upcoming projects. "George, always great to have you back," Jimmy said, leaning forward with that characteristic grin. "You know, I was just telling my wife about that time you pranked Brad Pitt with the bumper stickers." Clooney chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, that was nothing compared to what he did to me last month. Let's just say I'm still finding glitter in places glitter should never be." The audience laughed, and Jimmy shook his head in mock disapproval. "You guys are like children." Speaking of children though, I wanted to ask you about something a bit more serious. There's been a lot of talk lately about your foundation's work, and some critics have been saying that celebrities like yourself are just using charity work as a publicity stunt. The shift in tone was subtle but noticeable. Clooney's smile remained, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Well, Jimmy, I think anyone who's actually looked at what we've accomplished would know that's not the case. We've helped build schools, provided clean water to communities, and brought attention to human rights violations that would otherwise go unnoticed." Right, Jimmy nodded. But there was something different in his voice, a slight edge. "That wasn't there moments before, but you have to admit, it's pretty convenient timing. I mean, every time you have a movie coming out, suddenly there's a big charity event or a trip to some crisis zone." Clooney's posture shifted slightly, the easygoing demeanor beginning to crack. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you implying here?" "I'm not implying anything," Jimmy said with that same smile, though his tone had grown sharper. "I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking. It's interesting how your humanitarian work always seems to coincide with your promotional schedule." The audience had grown noticeably quieter, sensing the tension building between the two men. Clooney leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Jimmy, I've been doing this work for over 20 years. Long before I had the kind of career that would benefit from what you're calling publicity stunts. When I was in Sudan documenting war crimes, there were no cameras following me around. When we were setting up the Clooney Foundation, we specifically chose not to publicize most of our work. But you did publicize some of it," Jimmy pressed, and now there was no mistaking the confrontational tone. "And let's be honest, George, you're not exactly shy about making sure people know what a good guy you are." Something dangerous flashed in Clooney's eyes. The charming smile was completely gone now, replaced by a look that few people had ever seen from the typically composed actor. "You know what, Jimmy? I've sat through a lot of interviews over the years where hosts have taken cheap shots. But I thought you were better than that. I thought we were friends." "We are friends," Jimmy said, though his voice carried none of the warmth that statement should have held. "That's exactly why I feel like I can ask you the hard questions that other people won't." "Hard questions?" Clooney's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his famous composure. "You're not asking hard questions. You're repeating tabloid gossip and trying to dress it up as journalism." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Members of the audience were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bit or if they were witnessing a real confrontation unfold. Jimmy seemed to feed off the growing discomfort in the room, his smile becoming more predatory than friendly. "Look, George, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You show up to these disaster zones with your perfectly styled hair and your designer clothes, you take a few photos, and then you're back to your lake house in Italy. How much of a difference are you really making?" Clooney's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles beginning to whiten. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Do you know what it's like to hold a dying child in your arms because clean water is 30 miles away? Do you know what it's like to look into the eyes of a woman who's been brutalized and tell her that the world is going to pay attention now? I'm sure it's very moving," Jimmy said with barely concealed sarcasm. "But at the end of the day, you get on your private jet and fly back to your mansion. These people are still living in the same conditions." The color was rising in Clooney's face now, his legendary calm completely shattered. "You sanctimonious piece of work. You sit here in your comfortable studio making jokes about celebrities, and you have the audacity to question people who are actually trying to make a difference." "Hey, I donate to charity too," Jimmy shot back, his own temper beginning to flare. "I just don't make sure there's a photographer there every time I write a check. Is that what you think this is about?" Clooney stood up abruptly, towering over the desk. The audience gasped collectively, sensing that this had moved far beyond the realm of playful television banter. You think I risked my life, my family's safety, for photo opportunities? Jimmy remained seated, but his posture had stiffened, clearly not expecting Clooney to rise from his chair. I think you're a movie star who's built a brand around being the good guy, and that brand is very profitable. Profitable. Clooney's voice was now dangerously low. Jimmy, I've spent more money on this foundation than I've made on my last 3 films combined. My wife gets death threats because of the cases we take on. We can't take our children certain places because of the enemies we've made standing up for what's right. Then why do it? Jimmy challenged, leaning forward now, his own composure beginning to crack. If it's such a burden, if it's so dangerous, why not just stick to making movies? For a moment, Clooney was speechless, staring at his host with something approaching disgust. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with barely controlled rage. Because some things matter more than comfort, Jimmy, some things matter more than safety. There are people dying while we sit here in our air-conditioned studio, arguing about whether my motives are pure enough for your standards. That's a nice speech, Jimmy said, his smile now completely cold. Very moving. Is that the same speech you give to the reporters when they ask about your latest movie? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to stop, moving as everyone in the studio held their breath. Clooney stood there for what felt like an eternity, his chest rising and falling with controlled breathing. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? Clooney's voice was now eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes before an explosion. I actually respected you. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you understood that we have a responsibility to use whatever platform we have to help people. Jimmy's facade was beginning to crack now, uncertainty flickering across his face. George, I think you're taking this a little too seriously. This is just a conversation. Just a conversation. Clooney laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just spent 10 minutes accusing me of exploiting human suffering for publicity, and you think this is just a conversation. I never said you were exploiting anything. Jimmy backpedaled, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then what would you call it when you suggest that someone only helps people when the cameras are rolling? What would you call it when you imply that humanitarian work is just a marketing strategy? The audience was completely silent now, watching this confrontation unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was not the polished, scripted television they were accustomed to. This was raw, real, and deeply uncomfortable. Look, maybe I could have phrased things differently, Jimmy said, but Clooney cut him off with a sharp gesture. No, Jimmy, you phrased things exactly the way you meant to. You came into this interview with an agenda, and you've been pushing it from the moment I sat down. The question is why? Jimmy's face flushed red, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely rattled. You want to know why? Fine, because I'm tired of watching people like you get praise for doing the bare minimum while the rest of us actually have to work for a living. The bare minimum? Clooney's voice rose again, his famous composure now completely abandoned. Jimmy, we've built 17 schools in South Sudan. We've provided legal representation to journalists being tortured in Egyptian prisons. We've helped relocate families whose lives were threatened because they spoke out against corruption. And how much publicity did you get for each one of those things? Jimmy shot back, standing up himself now, the pretense of a normal interview completely shattered. How many magazine covers? How many award show speeches? You're unbelievable, Clooney said, shaking his head in disgust. You're actually sitting there, keeping score of how much attention someone gets for trying to help people. I'm sitting here wondering why a movie star thinks he's qualified to solve the world's problems. Jimmy fired back. What makes you think you understand foreign policy better than people who've devoted their entire careers to it? I never claimed to understand foreign policy better than anyone, Clooney replied, his voice dropping to that dangerous calm again. But I do understand that when you have a platform, when you have resources, when you have influence, you use it to help people who don't have those things. Or you use it to make yourself look good. Jimmy countered. Let's be honest. George, your career was stalling before you became St. George the humanitarian. Funny how helping people turned out to be such good business for you. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several audience members audibly gasped, and Clooney's face went completely white. For a moment, it looked like he might actually lunge across the desk. My career was stalling. Clooney's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had been shouting. Jimmy, I was doing this work when I was making $15,000 for a television episode. I was writing checks to Amnesty International when I was sleeping on friends' couches. Sure you were, Jimmy said with obvious skepticism. Very convenient that no one can verify that. Actually, they can, Clooney said, reaching into his jacket pocket. For a terrifying moment, both Jimmy and the audience seemed to think he was reaching for something threatening. But he pulled out his phone. Would you like me to call my accountant right now? Would you like him to read you my tax returns from 1994, 1995? I can show you every donation, every contribution, going back to when I was nobody. Jimmy's bravado faltered slightly. That's not necessary. No, I think it is necessary, Clooney said, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. Because you just accused me of fabricating 20 years of my life for publicity. You just told a room full of people that my entire humanitarian career is a lie. I didn't say it was a lie, Jimmy backpedaled desperately. Then what are you saying? Clooney demanded, taking a step closer to the desk. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're saying that every risk I've taken, every dollar I've spent, every threat my family has received, was all part of some elaborate publicity stunt. The studio had fallen into an almost supernatural quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the cameras and the barely audible breathing of 200 people holding their breath. I'm saying, Jimmy began, his voice now noticeably shaky, that it's awfully convenient how your humanitarian work always manages to keep you in the headlines. Convenient for who? Clooney asked, his voice now deadly quiet. Convenient for the families who have clean water for the first time in their lives. Convenient for the journalists who are alive today because we brought attention to their cases. Convenient for the children who are learning to read in schools we built. Convenient for you, Jimmy said, but the words came out weak and desperate. You know what would be convenient for me, Jimmy? Clooney's voice was building again, the anger returning with renewed force. What would be convenient would be staying in my mansion in Italy, making movies about superheroes, and never having to see another child die from diseases that disappeared from the developed world 50 years ago. What would be convenient would be not having to testify before Congress about war crimes. What would be convenient would be not having to explain to my children why people want to hurt Daddy because he tried to help people. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Clooney wasn't finished. But here's what really gets me, Jimmy. Here's what makes this whole conversation so disgusting. Even if you were right, even if everything I've done was just for publicity, so what? Those schools still got built. Those families still got clean water. Those journalists are still alive. But you're so obsessed with tearing down anyone who tries to do something good that you'd rather question the motives than celebrate the results. Jimmy's face had gone pale, the reality of what he had unleashed finally hitting him. George, I think maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Clooney said firmly, his voice cutting through the suggestion like a blade. We're not taking a commercial break. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now, in front of everyone. The desperation in Jimmy's eyes was now visible to everyone in the studio. Look, maybe I came on a little strong. Maybe I should have approached this differently maybe. Clooney's laugh was bitter and harsh. Jimmy, you just spent 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on national television. You accused me of using human suffering as a marketing tool. And now you think a weak apology is going to make this go away. I never meant to suggest, Jimmy began, but Clooney cut him off with a sharp gesture. Stop, just stop talking for a minute and listen to me. Clooney's voice dropped to that eerily calm tone again. I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine that tomorrow morning, your phone rings. It's someone from a major news network, and they want to do a story about your charity work. But instead of asking about the good you've done, they spend the entire interview questioning whether you really care about sick children or if you're just using them to boost your ratings. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably, but Clooney continued relentlessly. Then imagine that story airs, and suddenly every late-night host is making jokes about your fake compassion. Imagine your children coming home from school asking why people are saying mean things about their daddy. Imagine your wife having to defend you at dinner parties because people are questioning whether your entire public persona is a lie. The studio was so quiet that you could hear individual people breathing. Clooney took another step closer to the desk. That's what you just did to me, Jimmy, on live television. In front of millions of people. You took 20 years of work that I'm genuinely proud of, work that has literally saved lives, and you turned it into a punchline. Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did go this far, Clooney replied, his voice now ice cold. And the worst part is, I don't think this was an accident. I think you planned this. I think you came into this interview looking for a fight, and you kept pushing until you got one. That's not true, Jimmy protested weakly. Isn't it? Clooney pulled his phone out again. Because about an hour before I came out here, I got a very interesting call from my publicist. Apparently, someone from your show called her asking very specific questions about my foundation's financial records. Questions about how much money I personally donate versus how much comes from corporate sponsors. Questions about which trips get photographed and which ones don't. Jimmy's face went completely white. Several audience members audibly gasped. So either you've been planning this ambush for days, or someone on your staff took it upon themselves to dig up dirt on your guest. Either way, it's despicable. George, I can explain, Jimmy started, but his voice lacked any conviction. Explain what? That you invited me here under false pretenses so you could attack my character. That you smiled to my face while your people were trying to find ways to embarrass me. that you pretended to be my friend while planning to stab me in the back on live television." The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Jimmy opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. "You know what the really sad part is, Jimmy? I actually liked you. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you understood that we're all in this together, trying to make the world a little bit better. But you're not, are you? You're just another cynical entertainer who tears people down because it gets ratings." Clooney straightened his jacket and looked directly into the nearest camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. I came here tonight to talk about a new film, maybe share some funny stories, have a good time. Instead, I've been subjected to a character assassination by someone I considered a friend." He turned back to Jimmy, who was now visibly shaken. "I hope whatever ratings boost you get from this was worth destroying our friendship and embarrassing yourself in front of your audience. George, please." Jimmy's voice cracked. "Can't we just sit down and start over?" Clooney stared at him for a long moment, and for just an instant, it seemed like he might consider it. Then his expression hardened again. "No, Jimmy, some things can't be undone. Some words can't be taken back. You made your choice when you decided to turn this interview into an attack. Now you get to live with the consequences." With that, George Clooney turned and walked toward the exit. The audience sat in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars strode off the set without looking back. Jimmy remained standing behind his desk, his face a mixture of shock, regret, and something that looked almost like fear. As Clooney disappeared through the exit, the camera caught Jimmy staring after him, the realization of what had just happened written clearly across his face. The studio remained silent for several more seconds before someone finally called for a commercial break. "What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen anything like this happen on live television before? Make sure to subscribe for more incredible celebrity moments, and let me know in the comments which moment shocked you the most. Was it when Clooney stood up? When he revealed that Kimmel's team had been investigating him? Or when he walked off the set entirely? Drop your thoughts below, and I'll see you